Good Gabs, sponsored by Skillskin, a nonprofit organization empowering individuals with disabilities through employment. Well, yeah, Bart, it's really happy to have you today. And yeah, we're interested. How long have you been in Spokane?
Just over 7 years. We moved here after I retired from the Marine Corps in 2016.
Marine Corps? Yeah. Tell us about that journey.
Well, that started right after high school, so it's was a bit of a journey. It's all I ever wanted to do as a kid. You know, I grew up Northwest Montana, ran around the woods, played with sticks.
Like Libby, Montana, Kalispell?
Just north of Kalispell, a little town called Fortine. It's
just up on the Canadian border?
Just south of Eureka, so about 20 miles from Canada.
Yeah.
I think we had about 100 people in there. My dad was the pastor of a church there, and that's how we ended up there. Not a lot of houses, a lot of woods. It's a great place to grow up.
I can imagine. So, yeah, you were just exploring all those mountains and streams and rivers. Beautiful.
Yeah. I think about outdoor activities, and, you know, there's a lot of stuff to do here. But like hunting and fishing, I walked like 10 steps and there was the creek and a place. And it's a little more complicated here, so I haven't done any of it. But what a neat way to grow up.
Heck yeah, they call it God's country for a reason, right?
Oh, yeah. Mountains, they really they get me.
But you were ready to go, so it was Marines right out of high school.
Yeah, I didn't really have another plan. You know, it was all I ever really wanted to be as a kid. And you know, you go into the service and it works for a lot of people. A lot of people it works for just a short period of time.
Sure.
You know, they'll do 4 years and get out, but you get some work experience. You get to live somewhere that's not at home. And for me, it just worked. I was able to get a 4-year degree in my first enlistment, and was selected for a commission during that time, and it just kind of progressed and it worked.
Yeah, it's like this is a career.
Yeah, it turned into one. You know, I always said at the 8-year mark, it was the point of no return, right? Because if you do one more, you're more than halfway. But it was the point of no return probably for me at 4. It just gave me opportunity. Again, I grew up in a small town in Montana. My job was a military police officer initially, and actually I continued that all the way through. So I got to be the guy on the gate checking the IDs and for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And then I also got to run a military police department, which was also civilianized. So we had half federal law enforcement officers as part of my last law enforcement job.
Cool. What part of the world was that in?
So that was South Carolina. I used to refer to it as the wrong corner.
Okay,
you know, all my family's up here, and but South Carolina is amazing. Just amazing.
I've heard that. I've never been down there before.
Everywhere is amazing, right? It all just comes down to what you make of it. And we had the chance to live in Okinawa, Japan for 4 years, California a couple of times, Camp Pendleton and Monterey, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Egypt, lived in Egypt.
Cool.
And then my last job was in Jordan.
So you've seen the pyramids?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, many times.
Dang, that's one of my dreams.
Yeah. We actually saw it enough that my kids would say, "Oh, we got to go to the pyramids again." How great is that?
Very great. What an awesome experience for them.
Yeah. I've definitely, we have 4 kids, and 2 of them are wanderers and want to see the world, and 2 of them are just content to stay in place.
Are they here?
2 of them are. 3. Oh my goodness. 3 kids are here. My oldest daughter just got her own apartment, so starting to see the next generation take place.
Yeah, so they're setting down their roots here too.
Yeah.
And you said you were in Jordan right before here.
Yes. Yeah. As I progressed through the Marine Corps, I got selected for a special education program that made me a foreign area officer. And my section of the world was the Middle East and North Africa. And that included a master's degree studying about the Middle East and their cultures, which is pretty unique.
Absolutely.
In comparison to, let's just say, Northwest Montana. And I also got to learn how to speak Arabic, which was, you either have the skills or you don't. And I was one of the ones that had to flip a lot of cards and kind of figure it out. But those experiences, you just can't describe them enough. You know, probably my best friend in the world is an imam over 130 mosques in southern Jordan. And the times we spent just talking about Islam and culture, and not just talking about it, getting to experience it and being a part of it. Because once you're in with their families, right? Arab hospitality is a real thing. And when they say brother, you're part of the family. And
it is next level. My first wife, her aunt was married to a Saudi national, and their kids came over for school, went to Gonzaga, and, you know, kind of showed them the ropes. And Yusuf, the oldest, just a true brother to this day. Even though I'm not married to his cousin anymore, we still connect. In fact, I owe you a call, Yusuf, if you're watching this. That time zone difference. But yeah, I understand. Yeah, Arab hospitality.
And it's just a word, right? But the experience is something that you just can't replicate. And I got to enjoy that for 3 years, and working as a diplomat in the embassy, getting to put some groups together. Just special times. And
that's where you retired out of the Marines?
Yes. There? Yeah.
So then why Spokane, of all the places? I mean, it's not quite Northwest Montana.
That's a long story, and probably not what the podcast is for. But we had never in our adult life had a chance to choose.
Right.
And that was a harder thing than I could even imagine. Because
your kids are still like school age at this time?
No, most adults. Okay. I still had a high schooler, 2 high schoolers, actually, a high schooler and a middle school when we moved here. But one of my sons was going to University of Montana in Missoula. My mom and dad lived in Okanagan. My wife's parents lived in Calgary, Alberta. So we'd never kind of
something here, like right in the middle.
It's kind of a triangle thing, right? And so we started here to look here. I had driven on the freeway through it many times and just never got off the freeway. And I'm glad we got off the freeway.
Yeah, it's awesome.
This town is absolutely amazing. It provides everything, I think, that you could want in a bigger city, but your bad traffic day is like 10 minutes.
I know.
And you know, having a chance to live in Southern California and Washington, D.C., traffic's a thing.
Yes, it is. My wife and I were just down in San Diego, and we were just taking Ubers everywhere, and we're like, oh, this is just so amazing. And the last day we rented a car, and we're like, yeah, we're never living here.
It takes the joy away pretty fast.
Yes.
And so even in Seattle, to do this job in Seattle, I would have to, you'd commute downtown. And how much more to your day does that add?
Yeah, a lot of life in a vehicle.
A lot of life in the vehicle, but I can spend that time doing the work here.
Well, so tell us about your work.
Yeah, sure. I'm the police ombudsman for the city of Spokane, and I had to also learn what that was.
I think some of our listeners are too. Yeah, tell us more about that. What does that mean?
Yeah. A lot of things to a lot of people, I've found. There's a lot of differing expectations when it comes to it. But I would say, well, let's just start at the beginning. It's a difficult concept to describe. AutoZem was an employee of Skillskin.
Yeah, he was.
And really, my job and my office is part of his legacy. And we do our best to honor that through each and every interaction that we have with a community member. So our office is set up because there was some things that went wrong after. Obviously, his death was a terrible thing, and I would describe it as something that went horrendously wrong. So not to get into those details, but our office after Otto died, the police department, well, let's just say some would say they were less than forthcoming in regards to what occurred and how it occurred. And we actually had an officer go to prison, Carl Thompson, for 5 years, I believe. It might have been a little longer, shorter. But that didn't happen for years after Otto's death. So getting to what happened took years.
And so it sparked this movement, right? Of oversight?
Yeah, but it really starts with, should it take years to find out what happened when something goes terribly wrong?
Great question.
And that's, I think, the movement of oversight. And, civilian oversight of law enforcement's been around for a long time. I had the law enforcement background in the Marine Corps, a little different. We're security related a lot, but it's some nonsense from time to time. But between that background, running a department, I got to attend the FBI National Academy, have a master's of forensic science, and I got to be a diplomat where trying to find win-win solutions is a real thing. I wouldn't take out a single one of those experiences to try to do this job well. Because there's just so much angst. You come to the job and you think it's all about, reforming police, giving the community a better policing experience, making recommendations, which also makes it better for officers to do their job, keep them safe at the same time. You try to do this happy thing, and it is just not the way it goes. So we find police tragedies in our nation's history for probably as long back as you can even imagine.
Sure.
And I think the important thing to do this job and to do this right, it's to say that Otto was a person. He's not a statistic. He's not a bad event that happened. He was a person that mattered, and he mattered to a lot of people.
Oh yeah,
and
a lot of people at my work.
Yes. So that matters, and that should matter. The truth of it should matter, whether there's consequences or not. That's for another section. But
that was a catalyst for change because this office arose.
100%. So we were formed to make sure that there's transparency in investigations, that there is somebody looking at internal investigations. There was a Proposition 1, it happened before my time. I think it was 2012-ish.
Okay.
Could be wrong on that date. But we actually had the Ombudsman office placed in the city charter. And in the city charter gives us the...
I remember that was a big deal just to get there.
Yeah. And it passed by like 70 to 80% of the vote. So there was a good community interest in there. So it's not just a small group that cared. It turned into a movement through Spokane. So we were established to monitor ongoing police internal investigations and then also to independently investigate anything that we thought was necessary. Sounds easy, right?
Right, on the surface. Yeah, it's like, okay, yeah, we can do this.
The charter language is about this big, right? About 4 inches. That's not true. It's about a page. But it's not complicated. yeah, the ideas are there. They make sense.
But then
what
you add people,
you do,
and that's complex in and of itself.
people and systems. Since I've been here, I would say that we're in the news from time to time, and usually it's when something's not going right. Not necessarily in our office, but could be our office, could be the police department.
That's just one little snippet of time, right, compared to the whole work.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to do this for 7 years, and each year I get to a point I'm like, oh, I think I'm starting to figure out how to do this job. And I wish I could have what I had now 7 years ago. But we are progressing and we're kind of building it. But I think the point that I just want to say is everybody has a voice. The community has a voice. The police department also has a voice.
Sure.
And in Washington, subgroups within the police department and different unions and things, they also have legitimate voices. Whether or not we're all saying the same things or moving in the same direction, I think that has been the unique challenge on how to get this done. We are independent from the city. We're city employees, but city council doesn't come down and kick our door in and say, hey, I want you to work on this today. The mayor doesn't either. I would say never. Not in any of my time here has any one person said, I really want you to work on this.
That's awesome. That's a testament to the system.
Yeah. I mean, there's hints, there's some other things, but everyone recognizes that line. And when it comes to what I see, I think the one piece that we're still working on is establishing that voice to make sure that I can say what I see, how I see it. And then I live and die in my job on how well I'm able to do that, right? So right now we're kind of, live and die is a bad word.
But we understand what you're describing.
I succeed or fail maybe is a better...
well, an office of one, and do you even have staff?
We're actually an office of 3 now.
Okay, all right.
And every bit of that has been a step forward.
Can I ask a question? I was like, just because I'm a lay person, I don't know, but I try, I read, I try to be up on events. It's like, when I understood that, like, the office itself just may not have had a lot of access until, like, maybe recently or in the last few years, like the iterations of the office. I think our listeners would be interested in, like, that progression too, just so they understand.
Yeah, sure. And I would say probably the biggest driving, or the biggest driver to each iteration of change is the collective bargaining agreement with the police guild. It's been found that oversight is part of their mandatory bargaining topics, so they get to have a say.
Okay.
And
so those are big agreements, right? Like, I think about some of our federal contracts we deal with.
Yeah.
Like, there's time in between. So
yeah, they can go from 1 to 4 years. Like we just had one that went for a year. So really, around contract time, there's maybe a little bit more noise as people are starting to try to jockey for different authorities. Independent investigations is probably the thing that I've heard the most since I've been here. We don't do them. That's why we wanted you, those sorts of things. And for a variety of reasons, we just haven't been able to do one. And we just finished our first one, and we published that report in December. So let me backdate that just a little bit. 2 years before that, there's a lot of agreement and disagreement on whether we had the ability to publish a report at all.
right.
So we could look at things, but not necessarily tell you about things. And
So now there's this new iteration.
correct. So
A little more transparency. But things
Yeah.
move slow in this world.
Yeah. So let's go back one more. The one that was in place when I got here, it gave me some authority to do some things. And on the monitoring side of things, so internal affairs has their investigators and they do their thing. But we talk about the investigations. I participate in interviews. I can ask whatever question I think, so I can listen and see, are we hitting the scope of what the complaint was? Are we answering the questions? Does it seem balanced? Are we giving equal credit to the police officer and the community member at the same time? They're all separate interviews, right?
Sure.
And then after, they write it up and they have to send it to me for a certification. So every single internal affairs investigation outside of uses of force. So that's different, and that's another topic and something I'm very interested in. But we don't have a good handle on that aspect yet. But on complaints, monitoring-wise, I'm very proud of our system. I think we have things in place that other oversight agencies around the country could only dream about.
Awesome.
So, for instance, I'm not going to say the specific jurisdiction.
Sure.
But I have a colleague that is also a monitor, but he has to write his questions in advance prior to an interview. So there is
you don't even know the context.
You don't know how it's going to go.
That seems like an impossible moment for that person.
Yeah. But he was happy just to be in the interview. So there's different stages of oversight.
And every community around our country is different, I imagine.
They're slightly different, and there's nuances. But every community around our country that has it has a concerned community, also has a concerned police department and concerned police. They all have the people aspect of it, which can muddy it a little bit. So I certify investigations. After they're done, they come to me, and I review everything, and I'm looking for 3 words. And my 3 words are timely, thorough, and objective. Timely is pretty easy, right? Yeah. They have 180 days to get it done. But I also think, if it took you 175 days to call the complainant back, that might not be timely. On a small thing, right?
Sure.
But objectivity, right? It's just, is it balanced? So our internal affairs, they don't make findings, which makes it better to arrive at balanced. Then the chain of command has to make findings on their investigations. So all they write are the facts. And interestingly enough, that's what I get to write in my reports, are just facts and things that are said. Because right now, through bargaining, I'm restricted from saying my opinion.
Because that's a finding.
It could be seen, right? Yeah. Well, just from our report, and on our independent investigation, to be absolutely fair to everyone involved, it was complicated. We interviewed 32-ish people, might be 33. But everybody's desperate to know who's who in the report. And as that trickles out, it becomes media stuff, right? And there's people on the receiving end of that media stuff. Now,
including you.
Sometimes. Some would say, though, that's the accountability piece, right? It's definitely
I think it's a fair statement.
It's definitely the transparency piece, right? Mm-hmm. So when we want, this is a community that I would say for the most part, and when I say most part, 80, 90%, they really like their police. And as a part of my job, I get to be close to them. I'm definitely not an insider, right? The Ombudsman comes to town, and they're,
why are you here?
Exactly. So then I'll ask a weird question out of the blue and spin everybody, But I get to go on ride-alongs. I get to go to their training. I get to see that, we had this event last year that didn't go right. I mean, it didn't go criminally wrong, but it could have been better. And they focus their training, and they're changing, and they're trying. So take the legacy of George Floyd, which is a much more recent example. And it feels bigger because it was national and international
Sure.
consequences. Same kind of situation as Otto, though, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's an inflection point. Like things needed to change.
100%. But what is George Floyd's legacy right now? We don't even know yet,
Right.
because it's still impacting how communities are being policed, transparency systems inside of police departments. It affects our legislation in Washington State. One of the I applied for and was accepted. The governor appointed me to the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission.
All right.
So that we can focus on stuff at the state level. Last year, I was elected to the board of directors for the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement.
So you get to take some of the stuff that we're learning and these iterations of the office and kind of help spread that nationally.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. One of the things that I wrote right after George Floyd, and I made a recommendation to our police department. I did it for NACOL, which is that national association. And it was on duty to intervene. The person doing the action, they're easier to kind of deal with. We don't want them to do negative actions, but yeah, if you're doing it, you have to answer hard questions about it.
Sure.
It's that officer that's standing to the side.
It's a little more nebulous, right? Like,
It does, but if when you're talking about human life and you want to talk about just the dignity of a human life, that has to matter, and it has to matter all the time. I don't care if it's a scary situation or not. And unfortunately, part of the legacy of George Floyd has also put a lot of scrutiny and danger on officers around our country, and they're facing things that they've been facing from time to time, but it seems much more focused. And I think legitimately they have to worry about things that you and I don't have to worry about on a
100%
day-to-day basis. And it's easy to say they signed up for it, this and that. They're people too. So when we're making recommendations and we want to do things for reform, I want to do things which help the community, but also help our officers.
Well, you're talking about that officer that's standing next to it, that duty that they have to the person. That's how you build community trust too, though, right? If there's a commitment to this from a local police force, that community policing model, like it builds trust. It's called community policing for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And then we, don't, as a public, I'm just talking about like myself, like when I read headlines, and maybe I won't just jump to conclusions when that trust is built.
Yeah, and it's one of those, it's a building blocks kind of a thing, right? Because we all have those moments, and we all have that history that we're going to draw our conclusions from. That's bias, right? Every one of us has
We all
that.
have it.
Every one of us. Bias sounds like a bad word, but it's just how we tick and how we kind of approach things. So again, going back to recommendations and George Floyd's legacy. So we have some legislation in Washington which put out some police reforms, and some of them were rolled back last year. But you know what? That's the politician's job. They're going to do some of those things. But I kind of, just to make it full circle, when I think about legislative reforms and you hear some of the angst of the community about officers doing things which, to be fair, many people would consider criminal. And they have these protections, or they have prosecutors that aren't interested in holding them accountable for that. And we've had a couple of officers get arrested and put in jail since I've been here for crimes. But there's this push nationally to hold officers accountable and put them in jail if they commit these criminal acts. And I don't disagree with that. But my job isn't to put officers in jail.
Right.
My job is to create a department that stays on this side of that line.
Well, it sounds to me like if there's a push by the people and legislative action is happening, like police departments would want an office like yours in place in their community, because like things can go a little crazy in the political world, but you're an office like the Ombudsman's office here is that it's that fair, it's that balance, it's that all sides.
Well,
I would think I would want that.
They would want that. I mean, if we're doing our jobs correctly, right? We have to be about them as much as we have to be about the police department, or I'm sorry, the community. And when it comes to the recommendations, that's good moral high ground to say, I know you might not like this recommendation, but I see the legislation. I'm seeing how it's becoming easier to prosecute an officer. So how about let's keep our officers as far away from that line as possible? That's good for them too. Mm-hmm. And if that means we have to rethink some police tactics, I think historically we should be rethinking some police tactics. I get it. That's the way we've always done it. It's just not working for everybody,
and
right?
Things evolve.
Yeah.
And that would include, imagine, police departments too. Everything evolves. Communities evolve. Your office evolves. As you know, your office put out this, first independent investigation. I'm sure that's a weird moment too. You're like, okay, here we go. You put something out, and then you have no more control, right? It's like, okay, where does it go? And that's not a fault or a function of your department. It's just that's the world.
Yeah, and I think at some point, every one of us in every one of our jobs loses control over a product at some point.
It's a very terrible feeling. I know it well.
But we're committed to doing just our best. And we know when we write a report, or in this case, do an extensive investigation and then write a report, it's going to be scrutinized. And it's going to be scrutinized by the community who's like, are they doing what we want them to do? And it's going to be scrutinized from the police department who's like,
And then the politicians too, because like, how does this affect
is this fair? And then it becomes fodder. And, we're going into an election season, and I'm getting calls for like, well, what do you think should happen? And I'm like, that's not my job.
Good on you, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah. It's my job is to publish the facts, and that's it. The facts to the best that I think they are. And we weren't able to do that even 4 years ago. So when you think about progression of the office, we're still just an office of 3. It took us 6 months to get this investigation done, because the normal work that also takes sometimes 40, 50 hours a week, that's still happening too. So it's just trying to figure it out.
And to be thorough and fair, it's like, because all the eyes are on it.
Yeah. And if there's holes to be poked, so be it, right? Because we'll do our best not to have holes. It's a fascinating, interesting job. I'll say that historically, since I've been here, there's been a lot of things in the paper, the feud, I'm after the chief, the chief's after me. Some of that, it's, that's just part of the day-to-day working environment, right? Nobody likes the Monday morning quarterback.
Right.
Although they're famous, in football season anyway, but I do make decisions from the comfort of my chair, not in the moment. Which makes me think that the humanity of policing is just as important when I make recommendations. And I'll say over the last 2 years, the chief has implemented all but 4. And that's close to 40 recommendations.
That is a vast majority.
There's some feel-good moments there. We're looking for
collaboration.
We're looking for win-wins, and that comes from the diplomat in me. And there are times I'll just be that stick in that mud that everyone wants to trip over, because long term the strategy has to be the best policing experience in Spokane.
Well, that's a service to our community, right? Because if we get that right, that fundamental part of policing, it's a core part of a community. It's where oftentimes the most money in a community goes. Yeah. Like we get that right. Spokane County, this area, it's just better.
Exactly. And that right there is why I stay. This is not about fame and glory, that's for sure. But can you imagine just the possibility of being part of a legacy that makes communities safer, more trusting, not just for the communities, but for the officers as well. That's what
service. That's time. That's the career. That's a time well spent. I can see the allure. Like, in your mind, what might be some next iterations of the office? What's some of the best practices happening around the world right now in this oversight?
That may be the hardest question that you've asked me, because a lot of, at the national level anyway, we're still figuring it out.
Well, it sounds like we're leaders in that too. Like, you're bringing some of these forward ideas.
We are. I think a lot of it comes down to what are the community expectations and how do you meet them. But here we are. Trying to do math. I was a Marine. That could be hard. AutoZem 15 years ago?
Yeah.
16 years ago?
To now 17.
Yeah. And we are still trying to get the political will to establish the things that were put in place after that event, which is the catalyst for here.
Well, when you put that into that perspective over time, I mean, that is a slow moving ship.
Yeah.
But it hasn't stopped, hasn't gone away. And I just as a casual observer, it's like, want to definitely give you credit, because the staying power of someone kind of sees it through, sees the iterations. You don't lose the energy when the names change, because every time everyone has the different biases or different ideas, you lose the energy, and that hasn't happened. And that, I believe, is a fortunate situation for our community. So thank you for that. Thank you for your service in this role.
Yeah, my pleasure. But looking forward, I would say, the conversation that we're having today, it started with, it wasn't exactly like this, but what are you?
Right? Yeah. And more people are going to know.
Which means I definitely need to focus some energies in that regard. So kind of building that footprint a little bit more. I think part of the loss in there is that we've been just trying to define roles and responsibilities and abilities. I wrote a letter at one point in time, and the guild immediately threw a flag, and it wasn't, I'm just going to make up the topic.
Sure.
I wanted to use blue ink. Totally not true, but it felt like it at the time.
Yeah, just the thought.
You can only use black ink, and I was the only one allowed to click on a thing, which made it, if you take a week off, then you come back, you're a week behind every single time. So one thing that has progressed internally with our whole three people is we all have access to those systems now. And that was a bigger movement than I think I can express here. But my deputy, Luvi Mayomana, Gonzaga Law graduate, does not have a policing background, so brings just a tremendous different perspective than mine that I get to listen to every single day. And I think that what really helps us stay balanced and focused on both sides. She is now allowed to do every single thing I'm allowed to do. So she could sit in the interviews. She can write the reports on her own. She could do everything.
Allows that body of work to be able to grow.
Yes. So now we've had that for a couple of years. We've had reports for a couple of years. We now have an independent investigation. I wanted to do let's call it an investigation. We could say review or whatever of the protest response that we had here post George Floyd in Spokane. In every single police officer's memory that I spoke with, they had never dealt with such a thing.
Yeah, I can't remember. I've lived here my whole life, and I haven't seen anything like that.
Yeah. So do we expect they got it 100% right? Probably not, right?
Yeah, of course not. You've never done it before.
And we don't really even practice it because a lot of the
this
marches
isn't Portland, right?
Yeah, I don't want to talk about Portland because I don't know, but I'm with you on that.
Right. Yeah, just that experience that we live. That's not something. Yeah, the police department lives with every day.
Yeah,
I get that.
I'll give you an insight into a recommendation that's coming. They're throwing some gas at the time, and we can debate whether or not that was right. But let's just say what happened. But our police officers out there in the gas didn't have the equipment to deal with the gas. So we're putting people into places, having them perform certain tactics without proper equipment.
Dangerous.
How would you like to be that person?
Yeah, I would not.
Right? Yeah. And I think you have to think about it that way.
We wouldn't do that in our jobs.
We would not.
We would make sure, safety is an important aspect of whatever we do.
If the table needs to be raised, we care about those kind of things. But these folks are out there, and I would say, and it's in a very dynamic environment.
And life and limb on the line.
So helmets came, I think, from the National Guard. They just didn't have protective equipment. And when rocks are being, I don't know, I don't get rocks and bottles thrown at me all the time. But if I did, I'd like a big bubble. Yeah. Is what I would like. And I'm not asking for that, but that's equipment is just one thing. How we responded and how the crowds kind of split. Those are really interesting tactical considerations and worth studying, if nothing else, just to have that legacy of what happened before, because hopefully it'll be 40 more years, right? Before we face such a thing. But it'd be nice to have that historical memory at least reported on in there. Guild didn't allow that, but I'm hopeful in future iterations that we're going to be able to expand investigations into things like that could be systemic change sort of things, and where we could really offer solutions from around the country where we find that you learn from other people. Let's have them make their mistakes and we can learn from them so we don't have to endure everything here. But policing is changing tactically. There's just a little bit more space in their response, where we call it time, distance, and cover. You just kind of take a couple breaths before you walk in. Because they like to say, and they're right, they don't get invited to the birthday parties.
I hear that.
And think about the last time you called the police because you were having an emergency at your home.
Yeah, there's nothing good happening. That's
yeah.
right.
Have you had that? I don't want to imply too much, but things are not going good in your world at that time, and you're going to be totally focused on what's wrong. And they are, and the training that they're working on, this training cycle right now is on, here's how to use some bikes and how to respond to protest response or something like that. It's de-escalation all the time. We're inserting ourselves for a moment into someone's world. Let's do it in the best way possible.
Well, here to that. And that evolution, I know pairing, with mental health professionals, some of this stuff
That's
we just
happening
keep
here too.
getting better and better. And that's
Yeah.
awesome. And
I have one ask.
okay.
So, to some of our listeners, they're not going to know who AutoZone is. Could we give just a little description of what happened or what it was, or because they won't know that, they might not know that name, especially if they're not from Spokane.
For those of you who don't know who AutoZone is, he was a developmentally disabled janitor who worked for us at Skillskin. His life meant a lot to a lot of different people, and his death sparked this movement.
Oh, no, 100%. Yeah, there's going to be strong feelings on both sides
Sure.
of the story. There are some officers still in the police department that were on scene and had responded, and the repercussions after the event. So Otto was he was seen at an ATM by a passerby, and he was trying to figure out how to get money out of his ATM. And for whatever reason, a person passing by thought, it looks strange, whatever he's doing at the ATM. And they called the police and said that, I think someone's trying to break into an ATM. And by the time the police had arrived, Otto had moved over to a small grocery store, a gas station. I wasn't here, so I don't know exactly. And the first responding officer was Carl Thompson, who was a former police officer from Los Angeles, but well respected in the department. I think some people have said that they thought he was going to be the next chief, so it's kind of at that level of respect in the department. And excuse me, please cut that out. And he approached Otto from behind, and that's where the stories start to change. So a straight baton to the head and neck area, just kind of a very, we would describe it as a violent interaction.
Right, real aggressive.
And I won't go into whether that was justified or not, but if someone comes up from behind me and hits me with a baton, I'm going to have a reaction which seems like, what the heck is going on? I'm going to have an automatic response to pull away. And then you're in this moment of violence that you don't really understand either.
Especially living with a developmental disability.
Yeah. And through the process of that, there's a struggle. Even if your struggle is to get away, there's a struggle. And you can be striking me and saying, stop resisting. And it's almost, that's the dichotomy of how to look at police reform, right? Because you're causing an action that you're saying to stop is probably the real challenge. Whereas, no one will enjoy if I try to say coulda, shoulda, woulda. But imagine a spot where words were used and opportunities to understand and comprehend what was being asked. We wouldn't be talking about a story like this today. I think by the time the struggle was over, Otto had a mask put on him because there was
suffocated, died.
And he died. And he wasn't trying to break into an ATM. So it's tragic from the very beginning. People are going to call on things that say suspicious. We want people to call when they see things that seem suspicious. So we're not saying that's wrong. But what's the information that the officer has prior to their arrival? They're only going to have a snippet. And that's where we're really advocating now in the oversight world to slow down.
Just pause just a little.
Try to understand what's happening. Because if it takes 30 seconds to deal with it, that's great. I know. Then when you can move on to the next call. But if it takes 3 hours to deal with it, and someone doesn't have to be impacted the way Otto was and his family, which, by the way, doesn't ever stop. The people who knew him, loved him, all those things. That's the legacy of police oversight in Spokane. It's to try to get it to a point where it works for everybody. Developmentally challenged, folks who are struggling with addiction, anybody that might not be able to respond the way we want you to respond. I was a Marine. I get orders. You know, there wasn't a lot of wiggle room for slow obedience to orders.
Right, you're trained.
But everybody's not that. And you know, I wasn't providing oversight back at that time, but in the 7 years that I've been here, there is a recognition of that. There is a desire to get better. Post George Floyd, it's kind of been escalate's the wrong word, sped up because of legislation and some demands placed on policing where officers are, it's almost mandated that you'll do that. So, hey, the more emphasis, the more practice, the better we're going to be through that.
Better system.
Yeah.
As your office and the Ombudsman office evolves, I cannot wait to see. I think it was a watershed moment for our community, you know, to see what this investigation happen, published, and then, you know, where it goes. But that's a level of transparency that I just think this community needs. It's incredible. I think we have learned so much today.
Thank you.
Bart, thank you for joining us. It has been
pleasure.
an incredible pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.